We've been promising a deeper dive on this podcast in this really vital area this summer, staff mental health. So today, Jake sits down with Joy Hensel. Joy attended graduate school at Luther Seminary, the Hazelden Betty Ford Graduate School of Addiction Studies, and the Adler Graduate School. Joy's background in youth and family ministry includes 8 years in congregations and as the program director at Voyageurs Lutheran Ministries. Joy has worked as an outpatient chemical dependency counselor in a dual diagnosis program for adolescents, and currently is working as the grant program consultant for the Youth Ministry and Mental Health Initiative with the Northeastern Minnesota Synod of the ELCA. She's an adult mental health first aid instructor and a full-time parent. Joy enjoys opportunities like this to speak and to teach and be a resource, and we are blessed to have her share her perspective on staff mental health on this episode of the podcast. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, where we dive deep into theology, research, and practical wisdom for camps, retreat centers, and other key ministry spaces. I'm your host, Jared Rendell, camp enthusiast and part of the Sacred Playgrounds team. This podcast features Dr. Jake Sorensen, a scholar and practitioner who's helping leaders think more deeply about outdoor ministry and the impact it's making. Wonder with us what God might have in store at your Sacred Playground.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. I am joined today by Joy Hensel, and she is currently serving as the grant program consultant for Youth Ministry and Mental Health Initiative of the Northeast Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Wow, that is a mouthful, Joy. But it sounds like you are working with a church organization related to mental health concerns. And so that's why we wanted to have a conversation with you today, because there's a lot of mental health concerns among summer camp staff and among the campers, and we've become more aware of this. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that for the sake of our listeners. And so it's great to have you here, Joy, and to see your smiling face and to hear your voice. And just so people can get a sense of who you are, Give us a little bit about your background with camp and how camp fits in with your story.
Of course. Hi, Jake. I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. So I have a lot of fond memories of attending camp, actually, since I was quite young. My dad's a pastor, so every call that he had, I remember somehow being connected to outdoor ministries. From work days when I was really little to attending family camp as a family. And then my first big experience at camp on my own was when I was in 4th grade. So that was my first, I still remember my counselor. She was the best. And I attended music camp when I was in middle school. I even got to have the opportunity to be a staff in training here at some camps in northern Minnesota. I knew from a really young age, I always wanted to be a camp counselor, right? I thought that would be the best job. After my second year of college, I finally had that opportunity. I worked for Voyageurs Lutheran Ministries in northern Minnesota, and I was on summer staff for 4 summers as a counselor and then being part of their leadership teams. After that, I worked in some youth ministry. I'll share a little bit about me a little bit too, but I worked in youth ministry, and I brought youth to a variety of church camps, mostly in the Midwest. And then every year we'd attend Boundary Waters trips as well. We loved getting the city kids up into the Boundary Waters during the summer. I think one of the questions you asked me is, why do you love camp? I love camp for a lot of reasons. But when you asked that, it got me thinking. And I started to think about what my parents shared with me after my first summer of working at camp. I grew up in a loving household, right? And my dad is a pastor, my mom's a teacher and a parent educator. But this is what they observed about me after my first summer of living in camp community and having that role as a camp counselor that they shared with me, at least. They said, Joy, you came home with this newfound confidence and trust and understanding of what it means to be unconditionally loved.
I love that. That is such a beautiful thing and a reflection from the parents. I always love hearing parents' perspectives because oftentimes they can reflect more on the kid's experience than the child themselves. So that's a beautiful thing. As you were talking about Voyageurs Lutheran Ministries, it got me thinking about, northern Minnesota and where my wife grew up and her
Mhm.
experiences at Voyageurs and the experiences that you two had together
Yes,
at camp.
yes, she was my staff in training my first summer at camp, which is a really neat connection. You know, Speaking of connections, that community I'm still connected to today. Whether it be the family campers who came to our wedding 12 years ago, or just the ministry professionals that I still encounter here now working in Northeastern Minnesota. There's just all these beautiful relationships that get to continue, that those seeds were planted during my years at camp. Speaking of your wife, Anna, and my friendship and getting to know her throughout the years, I am so grateful to this day about, I'm so grateful for the friendships and the authentic care. And I would say the fierce love that still to this day surrounds me by my camp friends. That was 25 years ago, I think I worked my first summer at camp. Again, I'm just filled with so much gratitude for the opportunities that camp uh, provided for me to learn and to grow, to listen, to see how the Holy Spirit was active in my life and continues to be active in my life and those around me. I'm also really grateful for all the many seeds that I was talking about, like all those seeds that were planted that continue to shape who I become and my vocation.
That's awesome. Just to hear you talk about the care that staff have for each other over the years, and when you're on staff together, um, that's really what we're talking about today is how we can care for one
Mhm.
another. And when we were on staff years ago, a lot of people had baggage that they were coming in with, and there were a lot of challenges that we were all facing. We were wondering how to support one another, people that were going through different things in their lives. And I think there's been a lot more awareness in recent years about these mental health concerns. It's being talked about more in society. It sounds like it's an increasing problem, and so I'm sort of wondering, is this true, or is
Mhm.
it that there's just more awareness right now? I mean, if mental health concerns really are on the rise, what does this mean?
Right. The short answer, I think, is yes and yes. Uh, Research is continuing to show that COVID-19 and the layers throughout these past few years have really impacted the mental health of children and youth, young adults, really all of us, right? And it's impacted our whole selves. It impacts our emotional well-being, like we have been experienced heightened worry or fear and anxiety. It impacts our physical well-being, right? More people have had headaches or health concerns of some sort, like stomach aches or sleep issues. It also impacts our mental well-being. I think, I've experienced this, just concentration or maybe feeling like there's lack of progress or just some mental fog here and there. And then it also impacts our spiritual well-being. So much change and uncertainty and division and anger or resentment. Uh, there's just been so much. It's been a heavy load to carry. Some of the stats that I like to share when
Hmm.
talking about mental health, according to the Stress in America survey, this is a survey that I think is done yearly. And some of these statistics are from 2019, but I get up to 2020 and beyond. You know, they say the data that they're gathering says yes, there's been increased stress and mental health challenges for people of all issues, of all ages. And here I think is what's really important. Even if a person doesn't have a history of a mental health condition, since the pandemic started, for people who don't even have a history, there have been hugely increased rates of anxiety and depression, and also things like divorce and addiction. They have also increased throughout these years. The data that they collected states that symptoms of anxiety disorders were 3 times higher in the spring and summer of 2020 compared to the same seasons in 2019.
3 times higher.
3 times higher. And another piece that I think is really important for our outdoor ministry partners, our Christian camps, to also be aware of is that this survey is saying that parents are are just they're tapped out. they are much more likely to feel higher levels of stress. And they've been trying to carry this heavy load that's simply been unsustainable. These days, a lot of places, families are letting up and things are changing, yet there's still the ripple effects from the last few years on parents and youth of all ages. So I think it's really important for our Christian camps to be really communicating with families and with parents and really caring to parents and families. I just think that's a really key piece to keep in mind at this time. We're all a little bit edgy still, especially sending our kids to camp. And so again, communication is key and care, simple care for our parents and families as well.
That really helps put things in perspective as we think about how stressed people are, but that it's a rising challenge, these mental health concerns, and that the pandemic has exacerbated it so much. To hear it in numbers really is sobering, and it confirms sort of the feel that we all have that it's this increasing problem, and it gives us some numbers, and I think it also gives us some urgency. Like, this is something that we really have to be concerned with. So, I mean, if we back up a little bit and look at this idea of mental health, I mean, it really seems like this big container holding a lot of different terms. I mean, what do we mean when we talk about mental health? What does it entail?
Sure. It is like a big container because it holds a variety of terms and a variety of pieces that impact it. The American Psychological Association, they have a mental health guide specifically for faith leaders. It's APA, I'll have to look that up, but it's the American Psychological Association, and this is a great free download for all faith leaders. I want to share their definition of mental health because I think that it fits well. What they say is their definition is that mental health is the foundation. It's the foundation for thinking, communicating, learning, resilience, and self-esteem. So mental health is key. It's key to our personal well-being, our relationships, and how we actually can contribute to community and society. When I talk about mental health, I like to think about it as part of our general health, right? It's connected to our physical health. Our mental health is connected to our spiritual health, our whole being. And it involves how we can effectively function in our daily activities. Sometimes you might hear people talk about being mentally healthy. Have you heard that, like mentally strong or mentally healthy?
I have.
Yeah,
I've heard it used in a variety of ways, though. It's not always consistent.
Sure. Right. What I think about mental health, being mentally healthy, means is that a person can effectively cope with all the ups and downs of our daily life, right? Of daily life. Being mentally healthy means that a person has resources, that a person has coping skills. Maybe I should say coping skills and availability to resources. Mental health, in that definition that the APA uses, it talks about building resilience is a key piece to becoming mentally healthy. That's an interesting piece for our outdoor ministries to think about. How do we build resiliency?
For sure. That's one of the key outcomes of camp itself, is that camp oftentimes builds resiliency in these young people as they're away from home, they get homesick. That's all really natural. And that helps them, build this sort of resiliency and grit and these other characteristics that are important for life.
Right. As I'm talking about mental health, as you can imagine, there are just a lot of things, a whole spectrum of what impacts our mental health, from sleep to our nutrition to feeling secure and safe, our self-esteem or self-worth, feeling loved, our family experience, our relationships, our finances, the media, right? Facebook, Instagram, all of these pieces impact our mental health. And also trauma. COVID-19 has impacted our mental health. National disasters like fires and tornadoes and floods, they all impact our mental health. And mental illnesses impact our mental health. Could I talk a little bit about mental health and mental illnesses? Because I often hear people saying that they're the same thing.
I think that would be really helpful because as I think about this, a lot of times people just associate mental health with either you're crazy or you're not, and so there's this stigma around it, or this person's nuts, and you hear these these really mean terms associated with people, and
that builds up stigma, right? Those
it builds
words
up stigma.
build up
Yeah, and it's a
stigma.
way of dismissing their humanity a lot of times, it seems. So
Exactly.
please talk about this.
And in our camp communities, language is key, right? The words that we use throughout the summer have power, and it role models what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And so I always like to encourage people not to use the word crazy or nuts. These are not helpful terms. And instead of breaking down stigma, those terms build up stigma, and they just create a big barrier. And we want to take that barrier down. We want to take that barrier down. We want to be part of the positive by being focused on person-centered language, right? I know someone who experiences a mental health disorder. We want to talk differently than those words that are stereotypes that build stigma. So mental illness and mental health, they're different. They're not the same. But mental illnesses can be part of our mental health and well-being. Mental illnesses, how do I explain? They're health conditions, right? They're health conditions that involve changes in people's emotions, in their thinking, or in their behavior. Or maybe it's a combination of those three things. Mental illness tends to be more associated with distress, like problems functioning in our day-to-day social or work or even our family activities. I think a lot of people know examples of mental illnesses, right? Like depression, major depressive disorder, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, eating disorders, addictive behaviors. I think it's also important to remember that, mental health all people might have a mental health concern from time to time, but a mental health concern becomes a mental illness when there's ongoing signs and symptoms, and that these ongoing signs and symptoms are causing frequent stress, like distress, and are affecting an individual's ability to function in the day-to-day. That would be the difference. When we talk about mental illnesses, sometimes you might hear people say mental health condition or mental health disorder. They take many forms. And it's important to remember that for those who experience mental illnesses, there's a whole spectrum. It might be fairly mild experience, and it might only interfere in someone's life in limited ways, while some other mental illnesses, they might be so severe that person might even need a hospitalization per se. It's really important to know that the vast majority of individuals who experience mental illness continue to function. They continue to function in their daily lives, right? And these days we know so much more about how our brains work. So we've been able to come up with a lot of different treatments and opportunities that really help people successfully manage mental illness. There's three big takeaways whenever I talk about mental illness that I really want people to hear. That mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of. Mental illness is a medical condition, and mental illnesses are treatable.
That is so helpful to hear some of these distinctions and to get some of the definitions in front of us. I think let's take a break, and when we come back, let's talk specifically about camp and the camp staff community, the camper community, and how can we take some of these learnings, this knowledge, and apply them to the camp community. Let's take a quick break.
Hey camp friends, Sacred Playgrounds has a brand new resource designed just for your summer staff. It's called Holy Ground, a guide for summer camp staff. At its core is a daily devotional that accompanies your staff through the summer, from the intensity of staff training to the exciting early weeks of programming, on through the challenges of midsummer, and then the bittersweet exhaustion of those closing weeks. The devotion includes wisdom and reflections from dozens of current and former summer staff from multiple Christian traditions. It will also help staff make the transition from summer camp back to their home and school environments. Alongside these devotions are pages devoted to some of the most pressing issues facing your summer staff, including how to address tough questions and doubt, interpreting the Bible at camp, addressing mental health challenges, and key findings about the camp experience from the research at Sacred Playgrounds. Order by May 1st to get your copies in time for staff training. This resource is available at sacredplaygrounds.com.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We continue our conversation with Joy Hensel here about staff mental health. And I want to focus specifically on staff mental health because of the survey that we did last summer, where we asked a few questions, as the staff were coming into the summer about how they were doing and their current state of being and things like that. And we asked a few questions that really were related to mental health. And so we asked about anxiety, hopelessness, things like that. And the numbers were really alarming. And so it was almost half of the incoming staff, it was 48%, that said they felt overwhelming anxiety more than monthly in the months leading up to camp. It was a quarter, 26%, said they felt very down or hopeless more than monthly. 29% agreed with the statement, I am oftentimes unhappy about my life, who I am. And 16% had thoughts of self-harm at least once in the months leading up to camp. And so these numbers were pretty alarming to us as we looked at the staff communities and who these staff members were coming in. And just those four things that I listed off, about a third of staff had 3 or 4 of those. Another third had 1 or 2, and it was only a third that didn't have any of those sort of what we might consider red flags on that survey. And so to help our program directors, our camp directors, anybody who's supervising the staff get their head around this, like this is a very large problem that is impacting a whole lot of your staff. It's not just 1 or 2. We're talking about a third, 2/3 of your staff that are really going through some significant challenges and that need your support. And so Joy, looking at some of these things and knowing what we know about summer staff, that serving on camp staff is a stressful job. You mentioned sleep. We don't always get 8 hours of sleep when we're serving on summer camp staff, right? Kids wake up in the middle of the night. There's things to deal with. So now that we are more aware of the scope of the challenges and it's in front of us, what's your advice to directors? How can directors, program directors, supervisors better care for our summer staff?
Such an important question. Thank you for bringing that up. So this is what I always say when I talk about mental health in ministry. Mental health in ministry always begins with you. I'm going to say it again. Mental health in ministry always begins with you.
But I don't have problems, do I?
Well, what I mean by that is that program directors, executive directors, they need to be role modeling and tending to their bodies, minds, and spirits. They need to be tending to their mental health. And if they are not, probably pretty likely that their staff will be at least less likely to do that as well, right? If they're seeing and hearing the message that this is okay, this is good, this is what we do, we tend to our body, minds, and spirits. If they are practicing that, their staff will want to practice that too, right? They'll see, I want that. I want to do what they're doing because it's working. Something's working.
It makes so much sense.
It makes the difference.
It makes so much sense.
So that's my first piece. I have about 4 pieces that I'm going to go ding, ding, ding. The first one is mental health ministry always begins with you. Second, I think it's really important that program directors create a culture where tending to mental health and well-being is understood and expected as a daily practice. And then actually practice it. Not just say it, but actually practice. So integrate mental health language and activities into every day. In order to sustain the demands of summer, like what you're talking about, when we don't get enough sleep at night, staff must be equipped with tools that you can teach, right? Like coping skills or learning what their cans are. There's so much that we cannot control, right? But what can I do? Help them become aware of their cans and then help them create their own individualized mental well-being plan, right? that's really important for all of us to do, but for accountability throughout the summer to actually during staff training, write it down and then follow up on what their plan is. And maybe it needs to change, part of the summer as program and leadership staff is coaching and mentoring and teaching. And again, equipping with tools. Because if they can learn how to tend to themselves first, then they'll be able to tend to others and everything else much more easily. We have you ever heard of the when you're in an airplane, you have to put your mask on first before you can
Before
help
assisting
your
those
neighbor.
next to you.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So it's that sort of idea. You have to take care of your own mental health, and then you can care for others.
And if and bring it back to scripture, right? Bring it back over and over in the Bible. We hear that Jesus slept, Jesus wept, Jesus ate, Jesus lets out anger, Jesus takes time away, right? Jesus takes time away to pray, to connect to God. Jesus tended to himself. Let's be like Jesus.
Absolutely.
I think, yeah.
That's so profound. So, supervisors need to tend to their own mental health. They have to equip their staff to attend to their mental health, so that they're present for each other and for the campers.
Right.
So we're modeling healthy behavior here. We're doing it based on scripture. So that's two. What's another step for you?
Third one is, you talked about this in your last podcast, one-on-ones. One-on-ones are really integral for your staff this summer. When I was a program director, this was incredibly beneficial to me, to my staff, and to our community throughout the summer. I think to be able to show up and be present with each of your staff, even though it's hard, right? Because we have so many things going on within our days. Our days are so full, and there will be a crisis, or there will be something. However, to be able to make the time to allow your staff their feelings, to acknowledge them, to actively listen to them and validate by saying, I see you, I hear you, and then reassure them, I'm confident in your skills this summer, your abilities, you can do this. As a director, that creating that space will benefit everyone. When you allow space for your staff to ride the waves of their feelings, and when you've taken that time out, right? Like, this is the time that we get to do that together. They can have their big feelings. They can share what's going on. When we create that space, we build a trusting relationship with them. We get to just simply know the staff better. We feel better, or they feel better. We feel better because we're getting to know our staff. They feel better because they're getting their needs met, right? They're getting their needs met. And it makes everyone more productive because everyone knows they are in this together. So, brilliant idea in your last podcast. Everyone go back and listen to the last podcast that Jake did. I don't know what that was called, but one-on-ones, key for your.
And you're talking specifically one-on-ones, supervisor to staff member.
Yes, or leadership team. I think you can split those up with your leadership team and your staff. Yes.
So to make sure that the staff member has a connection with leadership, with supervisors, and they have a direct line and something regular. So one-on-ones. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's number 4?
And the fourth one, resources, right? It's all about resources. Bringing in a mental health professional. If you can't find a mental health professional, hospital chaplain. Hospital chaplains are another great resource, and often they deal with a lot of grief and loss, which has also been a really big component of many young adults' lives last few years. Or a panel of people to present and answer questions. I think young adults, they have questions, right? They have questions about the summer. So to bring that in during staff training, action steps can be things like crisis numbers in the bathroom, or grief and loss or mental health resources in the staff lounge posted somewhere, right? So it doesn't have to be obvious, but someone can go and get their needs met. They can go check those out and find out next steps if they need to. Sacred Playgrounds is going to have a great resource this summer, right? For staff to tend to their whole selves, it sounds like, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. So check that out.
It's called Holy Ground. Yep. We're coming out this summer. Yep.
Excellent. And then check in with your staff daily during staff meeting. How are you staying healthy today? Maybe that's part of the check-in during the staff meeting. Or how are you de-stressing today if it's a particularly stressful week? To not be afraid to just simply ask those questions. A couple other real quick resources. I think it's important for camps to have a safe space for telehealth in case any of your staff need to do therapy online sometime throughout the summer, and to figure that out individually with your staff and with the leadership.
So you have a
And
space set aside for them to do
yes,
that.
yes.
Okay, I like
And
that. And
and also,
okay.
oh, sorry.
I was just saying, I mean, where do they call? Are they call one of the hotlines, one of the numbers?
There are a variety of crisis lines and hotlines. However, if you have a staff person coming to camp who already has a therapeutic relationship with a counselor,
Yeah.
they might already plan to make a plan together to set up a weekly time and to negotiate with your staff and the leadership team how to fit that into the week, or
That's a
maybe that
great thing
weekend.
to know about. You should know that about your staff members. If they have these relationships, that's an important thing to nurture and to
Mhm.
support.
Absolutely. I don't know what all camps decide for media, like if they can have phones. I'm not up to date on that, but I do know that there are a lot of great mental health apps out there that can be really beneficial to staff as well. And it can be one more tool that staff are equipped with to stay accountable with their mental health. That's
Great.
another piece. And then just like we want to accommodate for telehealth therapy sessions that need to happen, we also need to accommodate for 12-step meeting needs. And these days, a lot of 12-step meetings can be online as well. So that telehealth space, or that safe space for therapeutic interventions, that's another opportunity for program and leadership staff to be thinking about. How do we accommodate someone needs to attend a 12-step meeting throughout the summer? So I pile all that into resources.
I love that. Yeah, that's all the fourth bullet point there. So I mean, we're talking about a very holistic approach to caring for our summer staff's mental health, starting with us, with the
Mhm.
supervisors, and making sure that we are setting positive examples and being positive role models and taking care of our own mental health as we
Mhm.
go through, and then equipping our staff members so that they can take care of their mental health as well, giving them the proper resources and things like that. Um, these are all really important things, and creating those spaces, resourcing them, and then making sure we do those one-on-ones. Um, this is more than just a staff training session. Like, you can't just solve this in 1 hour during staff training. This is
No.
something that has to continue throughout the summer.
Yes.
And as you said, the language, making sure that you're
Mhm.
conscious of that language throughout the summer, and that you're calling people out on that.
Another really important piece that I don't want to forget to share, Jake, is that the staff, leadership team, the executive director, they are most likely not mental health professionals. They are not the therapist for their staff, right? I want to encourage all outdoor ministry professionals to know and respect your role. As a non-professional, there are many cans that you can do. You can listen. And then if more care is needed, be confident that you get to be the bridge. You get to be the bridge, and you're the connector to the next step. And if you have a culture, if you're creating a culture of mental health in your community, hopefully you have a list in your office as an executive director or a program director that says, where do I go next if I need to be that connector or that bridge to get my staff extra support?
Absolutely. And I encourage the directors too to not just rely on yourself for these, because remember, you're their supervisor. And
Right.
so they might not share things with you because you're their supervisor.
Yes.
And when the job is connected to the conversation, that becomes
Mhm.
really problematic. We want to make sure there's safe spaces. So that's where, like you said, we're reaching out to those hospital chaplains, or having a
Mhm.
chaplain on staff, having
Yes.
another person there who can listen and be there and refer, that
Absolutely.
isn't you, the supervisor, becomes really important. So we're coming towards the end of our time. Wow. But I do want to, there's something that I've heard so much recently, and it's been such a challenge in recent summers for these camps, that, because staff are so stressed, and that mental health is being talked about more in culture, there's more of a sense of, I need to take care of myself, which is good. And it sometimes leads to a staff member saying, I can't stay here anymore because I don't feel healthy or I don't feel good. I'm stressed out. Serving on summer staff can be a stressful job.
Mhm.
So we know that it's stressful. We know that there are periods during the summer where staff might want to quit. We know that there's this idea of I'm just going to take a mental health day in
Mhm.
culture. And you can't really do that at camp if you've got a cabin of
Right.
kids that is reliant on you and fellow staff members. You can't just leave. And
Right.
so,
Unless
how do
there's
supervisors handle this?
right. There's one piece, if there's a mental health crisis, then your staff is in crisis mode and you're getting the help that that staff person needs. But
Absolutely.
what I hear you saying, Jake, is that, you know, there's an expectation and a job that each staff person is signed up to do. And so I think it's really important from the beginning of the summer to name this, what you've just talked about, like to pose this question at staff training, to name it, to bring up the issue and be really clear of everyone's daily expectations. And honestly, if you begin the summer by equipping your staff with the tools of how to best tend to themselves, and if all of you are consistently following up on those things, like doing the one on ones and following up with their mental health plan or their mental well being plan, that will benefit everyone and it will make a difference. And I believe that doing those pieces will really help prevent burnout as the summer goes on because the expectations are clear and the presence and the care and the messages of you're not alone, we can do this together is there as well. We can all get our needs met if we communicate and show up and do the best that we can each new day.
That is so helpful. Just reminding our camp professionals that caring for your staff will help them hang around.
Mhm.
Like, that this is a challenge because you need to do better job of caring for them. And so following these steps can really benefit your camp ministries as
Mhm.
well as the individual staff members. That is so helpful. Thank you so much, Joy. As we kind of wrap this up, I mean, there's so
Yeah.
much more I want to talk about, but I let me just do this real quick. So,
Yeah.
I mean, because COVID's been so hard. I mean, so many
Uh-huh.
people are struggling right now. So, if you had a young adult staff member in front of you right now, and it was clear this person was hurting or struggling in some way, what is the most important thing you would want to say to them, or make sure that they know?
I like this question. Immediately in my mind, I think about that I'd want to hold space for them and show empathy. And I think how I would do that, you know, I think this is what I'd say. I'm so sorry that you have experienced so much loss and hurt. What you shared sounds really hard. I hear you. I hear you. I see you. I'm here to let you know that you're not alone. You're not alone this summer in this, and you're not alone ever. I'm so glad that you're here this summer. I'm so glad that you're here. And I see God active and at work. I see God active and at work in you. And it is so good. Thank you. Thank you for being willing to show up. Thank you for being willing to show up and to talk with me today, to reach out for what you need. Thank you for sharing you with the community this summer.
Thank you so much, Joy. You've just brought so much wisdom to this conversation, and I really appreciate your insights. Those of you who are listening, you've got a lot of action steps, right? I mean, come up with that plan using those 4 steps that Joy talked about, starting with caring for your own mental health. Starts with you. Make sure that you're focused on language and that it's clear that these staff members are not alone. Let's eliminate the stigma around mental health and really bring it out in the open and let them know there are a lot of people struggling right now, and I'm one of them, maybe. So you have a lot of action steps here. It should be part of your staff training. You should have a comprehensive plan for your summer. You should have the staff people in place and the resources in place for your staff. and this will help your staff community thrive and your camp ministry thrive. Joy, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much for being with us today. Any parting words of wisdom for our directors as they prepare for the summer?
Thank you, Jake. I'm so grateful that this conversation is being held, and I look forward to seeing and hearing what camps are up to this summer. Last words, you are enough, friends. You are enough. And again, what I said earlier, you are enough. You are doing the best that you can today, and that is more than good enough. Thanks be to God.
Hear that, friends, and know that. We'll see you next time on the Sacred Playgrounds podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. This episode was produced by me, Jared Rendell, and featured Dr. Jake Sorensen, lead researcher and founder at Sacred Playgrounds, LLC. Our theme music was written and performed by Taylor Wilson. You can find his original songs wherever you get your music. Learn more and connect with the Sacred Playgrounds team at sacredplaygrounds.com.